And good evening. We are, with the help of God, beginning chapter 3 this evening of Shaar HaYichud v'Emunah, of the second part of Tanya. Last week we finished with a very interesting discussion at the end of chapter 2. So let's summarize, I think, very broadly everything we've said so far. Let's do chapter 1 and then chapter 2. And then, with the flow, we will go neatly into chapter 3, because as I said, even in the very first class, it's very organized. In other words, if you really remember even the short version of the chapters, it'll help you. It's not hard to remember the order of the chapters, what takes place, because it's one thing follows on the next. So the first chapter, essentially, of Shaar HaYichud v'Emunah, of the second part of Tanya, essentially states a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov taught, the Baal Shem Tov who shares a birthday with the Alter Rebbe that just passed, we should note, right? It was Chai Elul. Yes. In the schus of the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov, God willing, our class will be successful. The Baal Shem Tov taught that when it says in Tehillim that God's words stand constantly in the heavens, it is referring to the words, "Let there be a firmament from the 6 days of creation." In other words, what is it that is actually creating the earth at every moment? It is the words of God that He spoke in the 6 days of creation, like "let there be light," "let there be a firmament," etc. In other words, God started speaking and He has not yet stopped. How do we know He hasn't stopped? Because the universe still exists. And if He were to stop speaking even for a moment, the universe into existence, it would revert back to absolute nothingness as it was before the 6 days of creation. This is a description of the process of creation yesh ma'ayin, of creation something from nothing. In chapter 2, we explain this at much greater length. The reason why it's at much greater length and in greater depth is because chapter 1 is essentially saying this based on faith, where you believe it because the Baal Shem Tov said it, and because it says it in the Midrash Tehillim and various other sources. This is what we're taught by our holy teachers of Torah. But in chapter 2, the Alter Rebbe moves on and begins to explain this idea according to reason, according to the way the human mind can understand it, right? He begins by addressing the chapter to heretics, and as we've said on multiple occasions now, the heretics being addressed is really our own heart. The animal soul is the heretic. The animal soul says that I can believe that God creates the universe something from nothing, but I cannot believe that God is constantly involved, in creating the universe, that He can intervene in the universe, that He cares about what's going on in the universe, that He makes miracles take place that alter the course of nature. That's where I draw the line. God may have created the universe something from nothing, but He is not constantly involved. To which the Alter Rebbe says this position makes no sense, because if you really understood what it means that the universe is created something from nothing, you would realize that God must constantly be involved in it. And we drew a distinction between human creation and godly creation. Human creation does not even really deserve the name creation. Human creation is really formation. We take something and we give it a new form, yesh meyesh, something from nothing. Like the silversmith forming a vessel, forming a cup, or forming a menorah. But when God creates the universe, He does not create it something from something, He creates it something from nothing. What does that mean? It means that it is not a pre-existing material that now exists in a new way, in a new form, right? He is not bringing out the potential for a new way of existing, that before there was something but it didn't exist as a universe, and now it exists as a universe. What does it mean He creates something from nothing? It means that there was no potential for anything before. There was no room for anything to exist. There was no possibility for anything to exist. And then God made something exist. And in this method of creation, the involvement of the Creator must be constant. He cannot go walking off in the market and leave it there. The only reason why in human creation you can create something and then go walk in the market and it persists, right, like the silversmith with a menorah or silversmith with a cup, the reason why it remains a cup even though he goes walking in the market is because essentially the existence of the silver predates him. In other words, the silver did not need him to exist in the first place, and it doesn't need him to exist now. The only thing that he does in this whole process, the only thing he's needed for, is to change it from the form of a block of silver to the form of a vessel. But once that form is changed, his role is ended. The existence of the thing carries on as it always has, and he does not need to be there to continue that existence. All he did was bring out a potential. God, on the other hand, when he creates the universe, is not able to walk away. Why not? Because he is not bringing out, but there is no existence that precedes the universe. There is nothing which always existed whose form God is changing. Rather, there is absolute nothingness, there is no potential for being, and God has made being be here. Right? In other words, this being is only the godly effort that is expended to create it. And if that godly effort were to cease being involved for even a moment, it would return to absolute nothingness. For this we had a metaphor. The metaphor was the splitting of the sea, that the water standing of the wall is a new nature imparted on the water. And therefore it requires God's involvement. It requires the blowing east wind to blow all night to hold the sea split, to hold the sea open, because God is imposing a nature upon the water that is not natural. The water has no potential to stand like a wall, and God is making it stand like a wall. And therefore, if God were to cease from lending it this new nature, it would immediately collapse, and the wall would fall, and the water would return to its natural state. We had another metaphor from outside of the text of the rock that's thrown up in the air. It's the same idea. The flight of the rock upwards is something that the rock has no potential on its own to do. It is only possible because an external force, a human being, comes along and he takes the energy in his arm and he imparts it to the stone, he gives it to the stone, and as long as his energy is affecting the stone is able to fly upward. But the moment the energy that he imparts to the stone runs out, the stone immediately returns to its nature and plummets back to the earth. It's the same idea. We finish this idea by saying, all the more so, God's creation of the universe, something from nothing, because with the water and the stone, he is only changing the nature. We are only giving a new nature to a thing that already exists. But God, when he creates the universe, is creating something new, whole cloth. He's creating something entirely new. We finish chapter 2 by returning to a discussion of the various letters and the combinations of letters of the divine speech which create the world, which was the Alter Rebbe's way of emphasizing again a point which was emphasized in the first chapter and which is emphasized again in the second chapter. This is what we discussed last week, that God not only is the creator of the world, but he also gives the world life. In other words, it is not just that the thing exists, which is godly, it is also the teichen of the thing, what the thing is, its mahus, its very essence, its very being, the deepest truth of everything that exists is the godly power that is invested in it. It's not just that God is apart from the thing and creates it and it depends on him. Rather, what the thing is entirely in all of its aspects is also godly and also an expression of the divine speech. That is what we have learned until now, in the short version. Chapter 3 moves directly into the next part of the discussion. Chapter 2 is really focused on the idea, essentially, that if God were to stop creating the world at every moment, if he were to stop speaking it into existence, it would totally cease to be. Chapter 3 moves on to what turns out to be an even deeper question in a way. We're going to take this idea and we're going to take it to a new level. There's going to be new layers to this idea. Because once we're done discussing in chapter 2 what would happen if God were not creating the world at every moment, we are left with the question, so what is it now that it is here? Right? Chapter 2 discussed the fact that the world is here and what the world is entirely dependent on God at every moment. In other words, if God were to cease making it be, it would not be. But the question is, now that he is making it be, right? The world is here. The question is, what is here exactly? What is the universe? What is the world now that it is here in this fashion, that God is creating it, God is speaking it into existence at every moment? So the question is, what is the nature of the reality that is created by this divine speech? That is the question of chapter 3, which we'll begin inside right now. Ve'ine, behold, Pergimel. Behold, achrei hadvarim va'emes ha'eleh, after these words of truth, meaning to say, after we have arrived at the understanding that even according to our own intellect, that God must be constantly involved in the creation of the universe. Kol maskil al davar. It's translated here, every discerning person. I won't argue with the translation. Every discerning person, Yavin, will understand la'ashuroi, clearly and well, ekshekol nivra v'yesh, how every creation, and nivra is a creation, that which is created, and yesh, every seemingly independent existence from God, who be'emes nechshav la'ayin ve'efes mamish, is in truth considered, this language is very precise, is in truth considered as if it is absolutely nothing. From that sentence, we can immediately negate the most common beginner mistake of when beginners learn Chassidus,